Back here on the show, and we're going to go all the way back to last Thursday, where it was the last positional rankings that ESPN came out with on their website. I saw it. I didn't really read into it because I had other things planned for Friday and those shows that I didn't get a chance to talk about it sooner. But when I did get a chance to go back to it and really look at how these players were ranked and some of the reasons for that, I had to bring it up on today's show just because there were some pretty harsh things said about some of the corners, and the way that it all lined out was kind of interesting on how it was all based, of course, on NFL executives and scouts and coaches that all gave their input on how these rankings came out. So we're going to go through it. I'm going to tell you what some of these executives said about these rankings and how it all shaped out. But starting with 1 through 5, we have at number 1, Patrick Surtain. Number 2, Denzel Ward. Number 3, Sauce Gardner. Number 4, L'Jarius Sneed, who is now on the Tennessee Titans. And number 5, Jalen Ramsey, marking out the top 5. And then, just to go through the entire list before we talk about it, at number 6, the second-year player heading into 2024, Trent McDuffie. Then at number 7, Jair Alexander. Jalen Johnson, who got a massive extension this offseason, goes in at number 8. Devin Witherspoon, another second-year corner now in 2024 at number 9. And Derek Stingley. They are rounding out the top 10 for the top 10 defensive backs in the minds of these executives, NFL coaches, and scouts as well. But we're going to start off going back through 1 through 5 because how it all shaped out and how this entire list shaped out was that 5 of these defensive backs entered the top 10 for the first time in comparison to last year. There's a lot of new faces that make up this list, and one NFL executive gave his thoughts on it, saying that he believes that there wasn't really an elite shutdown corner, not even just last year, but for the last few years in the NFL, because he believes it's tougher with the favoring of the passing game recently in the NFL. It's hard to just, analyze these corners, make a ranking of 1 through 10 just based on coverage skills, because a lot of times they get the short end of the stick. So he brought up looking at other aspects of their game that could elevate them just above some of these other guys, because all these corners are very talented and they are all number 1 corners on their respective teams. But this NFL executive pointed out looking at blitzing, how they support the running game. Also, just to see what else they could bring other than just being elite coverage, one-on-one, man coverage sort of guys. What else can they do to distinguish themselves in a league where the passing and the offensive side of the ball is a lot more favorable to the audience, and that's what the NFL pushes nowadays. But speaking of the number 1 corner and just talking about him and getting into some of these guys and their evaluations, Patrick Surtain received more than 50% of the votes as the number 1 corner. That is back-to-back years now where Pat Surtain finds himself at the top of the list. Then, right away, one of the biggest surprises and one of the biggest jumps in the entire list was Denzel Ward, because last year he was ranked as the number 9 best corner in the league, and now this year he jumps all the way up to number 2, and that subsequently drops Sauce Gardner from that number 2 spot to number 3. Not a big drop-off, but what one executive said really caught a lot of headlines on evaluating Sauce Gardner and really determining what kind of player he is, because I think a lot of people, like myself, think Sauce is probably, I would have him as number 2, personally, but this one NFL executive said he called him one of the most overrated players in the league as of right now, while others shared my same, side of things and praised his combination of size and just ability to move around and be as fluid as he is with being such a massive corner. But one executive who is obviously anonymous, said he believes he's one of the most overrated players in the NFL. And I can kind of see it. I can try to be objective about it just because in a passing league, oftentimes corners find themselves struggling to make an impact if just the offense is not targeting them. And the quarterback is just having his way elsewhere on the field. They're not really making or impacting the game that much. Yeah, they might be shutting down one side of the field or just taking out one player, but what are they really doing to change the outcome of a game if they're not getting the balls thrown their way? That's one argument for or against corners, however you take it. But To call Sauce one of the most overrated players in the league, I think is a bit of a stretch just because he's already made a big name for himself, and you see how much notoriety his name carries just when you're talking about on the field and off the field as well. Before Sauce Gardner came into the league, no defensive back had ever been on the first team All-Pro team in their first 2 years. Now, with him, obviously in his first 2 years, he did that exactly, so he made history that way. And he is hardly thrown at the entire game, so it is hard, like I mentioned, to really make an impact on the game if quarterbacks honestly are just scared to throw your way, is how I view it a bunch of times. But in terms of other stats and how much he impacts the game elsewhere, he was first among defensive backs in separation allowed. He was third in forced incompletion rates at 21%, fourth in the NFL in first downs allowed at 11 in 2023. So, again, to call him the most overrated player in the league, I could probably name a few more. Where Sauce, I just don't think he plays a position where you impact the game as much as an offensive lineman, an outside linebacker, something like that, where you always have a chance to cause a fumble, sack the quarterback, or things like that, affect the throw. Corners, safeties don't really get the chance to do that much. If they're really doing their job that well, they're not going to get looks, and they're not going to get the stats, and just people obviously just a lot of times just look at the stats to make their determination. But top 3 is pretty fair for Sauce. 2 to 3 is all right. So Pat Surtain definitely deserves that number 1 spot. Then moving down the list, getting to number 4, L'Jarius Sneed jumped up to number 4 after last year being an honorable mention. Very impressive 2023. A reason why he got paid so much and moved on to the Tennessee Titans. I just recall back to the wild card game against the Dolphins where he pressed the heck out of Tyreek Hill, really made it a struggle for their offense to get anything going. In the cold, just bullying Tyreek Hill. That was one game, but then in the AFC Championship game, 2 massive plays that he made. One of them irking Zay Flowers a little bit on that long pass he caught, forcing him to get an unsportsmanlike conduct called against him. That was one play. But then the biggest play, obviously, on the goal line, Zay Flowers tries to extend to get a touchdown. L'Jarius Sneed punches it out, and it goes out the back of the end zone for a touchback. So those 2 plays jump out right away to me. He had a great year last year, regular season and playoffs. He made a lot of impact plays, and that's why he's at number 4, and that's why he got paid so much this offseason. And then Ramsey at number 5. I compare him to Devontae Adams a lot, just in terms of the rankings, because they've been so good for so long that now that they're getting a little bit older, I think moving down the list is just the natural thing to happen. Still, a top 5 corner isn't bad, but I think that's just the natural occurrence of these things when you have so many young players just making names for themselves, mostly currently in the NFL. Then we get to the next side of it. At number 6, Trent McDuffie. A little surprised just because young player to be ranked so high. I wasn't expecting it, but he too made a lot of impact plays alongside L'Jarius Sneed in the playoffs. Had an amazing Super Bowl. It would have been a long shot, but you could have thrown his name in there for Super Bowl MVP. Just the way he covered Debo, took almost Brandon Ayuk out of the game. He had hardly any looks thrown his way by Brock Purdy. And the one that jumps at me right away also was that pass breakup he had in the end zone on a deep pass from Brock Purdy, where it was still 0-0 and the defenses were just showing out. He was a major contributor to that, and that's why he's at number 6. Then at number 7, Jair Alexander had an up and down year, but one NFL executive in the NFC said that he believed that Jair had an up and down year, but that he always plays good against Justin Jefferson. So in his mind, if you always play well against these top wide receivers, you deserve to be on the list, which I thought it was a perspective that I've just never heard, really. But it makes sense, I guess, if you always just, play up to the competition, especially against who many believe is the best receiver in the NFL in your division. You have all the eyeballs on you, and if you perform well, that is something to stand on. But I don't know. I feel like there should be more than just that, but it is a good point at the end of the day, so I can kind of see it. But number 7 isn't too bad for Jair. Then Jalen Johnson at number 8 had a solid year towards the end of last year in the regular season. He got a massive extension as well, and he really made a name for himself this year. Then at number 9, is my biggest gripe Devin Witherspoon. He had a great year. I didn't watch too much of the Seahawks, so maybe my opinion is skewed a little bit, but he's a young player too, who I'm sure made a big impact for the Seahawks. I know that he was one of their shining players, one of the shining spots on their defense, but trying to put my biases aside as a Steelers fan, for Joey Porter Jr. to not get any honorable mention votes, or really, I could have arguably put him in the top 10. Bias, trying to put it aside. I just feel like Devin at number 9, comparing him to Joey Porter Jr., I think those stats and the tape would have shown a lot closer comparison than a lot of people really try to acknowledge. But, Devin, I can't really knock him. He had a good year last year, one of the rising players for the Seahawks. But, again, I got to try and support Joey Porter Jr. here. Had a great year last year and was, again, also similar to Devin Witherspoon, made a big name for himself in a division where you have a lot of great wide receivers, and he held his own in a lot of competitions against those number 1 guys. So, unfortunate to see that, but I'm just going to have to accept it. Then at number 10, Derek Stingley, one of the more underrated guys, not talked about as much, really, on that Houston defense. It's usually last year Jonathan Grenard. Christian Harris had a good breakout year, but Derek Stingley was right there. 5 interceptions, 13 pass breakups, and 31% ball hawking rate, which was first in the NFL. He is slowly, I think, making strides to be one of the best corners probably in the AFC. He is still pretty young, but if this Texans team and really their defense stands up to a lot of great offenses that they're going to face in 2024, I think he could, again, probably climb this list and go all the way up to maybe number 7 or number 6, just based on how he performs, because last year you saw some glimpses there, but I think the more reps he gets against some of these tougher teams, the better he's going to show out. And this Texans team just overall got a lot better, and I think that'll help him out a lot. But that is the list. Those are my thoughts on it. Witherspoon, Joey Porter Jr., I would have had my guy in there, but that's really my only gripe. Again, it's hard to nitpick on who the best corner is, because some say Sauce Gardner's the most overrated player in the NFL, and some love him at number 3, number 1, or number 2, but to each his own. But overall, pretty solid list. Let me know what you guys think about it in the live chat box or in the comments section after this video. But that'll wrap it up for that segment. We're going to move on to another break, and when we return, we're going to talk about the developments on the contract negotiations with Jordan Love and the Packers. Over the weekend, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler had a report to talk about where the negotiations are at that point over the weekend and how that could translate now into training camp starting to ramp up a little bit more. More on that topic when we return. We'll be right back after this break.
Looking